Good evening, everybody. This is the 28th of July, Tuesday, and we're going to do lecture 14 tonight. It's going to be shorter than the other lectures, I think, because I'll get you studying for the midterm and I'll go over a few things with you, but mostly we're dealing with the demand for money tonight. And what are the most important independent variables affecting the demand for money function? And there's all sorts of empirical studies that have been done. The obvious one, I think, is population. If population is increasing, then the demand for money is increasing. And if it decreases, then the demand for money would decrease, other things being equal. So population is by far and away the most important of all variables. And what do we want to say next? Then you have increased specialization. That means if the division of labor gets larger and affiliates, that is branches, into more and more of the economy, then the demand for money will increase. Think of a farmer who's fairly self-reliant out in Iowa, and he gets sick of farming, so he decides to move to New York and become a CPA, which he does. And sitting at a desk for 8 to 12 hours a day, say, increases one's demand for money. You don't have a chance to go out and produce to meet your needs like you do as a farmer. So the demand for money increases with specialization. And then we have an extension of the market system over the surface of the earth. What do I mean by that? Well, really the late 1960s up to the present time, the market order has extended itself. And just think, particularly in the Americas, meaning South America, well, Latin America to cover everything, Central and South America. We have China, even though it's state capitalism, still there's a lot of room left for the market. And what other parts of the earth? Europe, Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, they're no longer communist. And so you see, by extending the market order, the demand for money increases. If you shrink it, the demand for money will decrease. And what are we saying here? Countries that are not part of the market order are very primitive, third world countries, if you will. And the understanding is if you allow the market to come in and join the global division of labor, if you will, then your productivity is going to increase, and certainly you'll need more money to conduct transactions than in a primitive state. So there's all sorts of variables that influence the demand for money. We also understand that as with the liquidity premium, you're going to perhaps get too much money, more than you ever thought. And so as a part of your personal adjustment, you can reduce your level of cash holdings, reduce the demand for money because of the existence of goods of secondary marketability. And so you'll have that factor as well. I think for the examination, we will confine ourselves to one chapter in the textbook, which would be chapter 16. And I'm using a 2018 book. I have misplaced my 2019 book, but it's the name of the chapter is the demand for money, and then what's particularly important are the three parts the breakdown of the demand for money, and it's done by motive. You have a transactional demand, you have a precautionary demand, and a speculative demand for money. And all of these things, if you think about it, well, eventually the money is spent in transactions. So really doesn't enlighten us that much to look at the motives of people. We know that the primary function of money is that of a medium of exchange. Secondary functions of money, all of them, believe it or not, are aspects of the medium of exchange function. And of course, the most important one, I think, of the secondary functions is the common denominator of values function. It points in that big debate between the socialist commonwealth and the market system. It points to the presence of economic calculation. And then you have the key question: how does the market system adjust to change? Well, it does so through the price mechanism. Price equates supply and demand. It directs production. Really, really important two functions, and specifically the second one in relation to the question. And then we have, and don't you see that maybe the price mechanism will account for changes in the demand for non-monetary goods. But we have, what else? Oh, well, I lost my train of thought here. Oh, isn't that awful? This happens more and more as you get older. Oh, well, I guess we'll have to come back to it. Anyway, I'll come back to it. The demand for money. Oh goodness, I just lost it. I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. So we have the demand for money for all these variables, and but really, it's money eventually will be given away in transactions, and that's that. So let's see, what else do we have here? And now a really, really important let me now I know I was talking about chapter 16. It's chapter 16. You just look for the transactional, precautionary, and speculative demand for money. It's interesting reading, but again, doesn't enlighten us all that much. And there's something else I'm leaving out, and oh boy, anyway, we'll move on to a very important consideration. Well, here I go. I think I remember it now. The most important secondary function of money, it too is a part of the medium of exchange function, but the most important one is, in my opinion, the common denominator of values. So we have economic calculation that occurs in a market system, and along with the two functions of price, permit us to adjust to change. And the two functions of price can deal with let's say a sudden increase in the demand for chocolate. But if we want to really change the world, what do we have to do? We have to undertake direct investments, and that means that there's an entrepreneur there to put a business unit together, and he is going to put together a story that will persuade himself through those 8 key accounting concepts. What are they? Capital and income, profit and loss, expenditures and saving, costs and yield. He's going to put together a story, and it will persuade himself, and then he goes to get financing, indirect finance, if you will, not direct financing for a direct investment. And that story is told to the lending officer of a bank, and hopefully it's persuasive enough and thorough enough that the person gets the funds for the investment. So we have the money as a common denominator of values. It gives us economic calculation, and of course we have the price mechanism thrown in there too. It meets kind of the intellectual needs of mankind, especially the entrepreneur's needs, and we have the business about accounting and economic calculation gives us a concept of what a business is, and it's all, the entrepreneur is all important, of course. And what else? In the academic debate, we found out that the socialist commonwealth was impossible because there is no means of economic calculation. There's no exchange, no money, and don't you see, the socialist commonwealth has to adjust to the changing landscape by trial and error. And a lot of times error occurs. The consideration of the common denominator of values function is really, really important. And now enough of that in my memory. Wait until you get older. But another thing that we have to consider today is and we're going to use the demand for money and supply of money in this. We're going to look at the business cycle and ask the question, is it a monetary phenomenon or is it a non-monetary phenomenon? And so many people are wont to say that it's non-monetary, and but I want to show you a necessary condition for the recurrence of the business cycle, and a sufficiency condition. It was given to us by a very, very famous economist way back in the 1940s. His name was Gottfried Haberler. I actually met him at Milton Friedman's 60th birthday party. And he was quite a sharp guy, big and international. He was a student of Joseph Schumpeter and later became a professor at Harvard, and really was a powerhouse there, if you will, great economist. And he said that an increasing supply of money and credit is a necessary condition for the long-run occurrence of the business cycle. Let me state it again. An increasing supply of money and credit is a necessary condition for the long-run occurrence of the boom of the business cycle. And where do we get long run and short run? Well, short run, there's an economist, Hyman Minsky, who in the Kindleberger book gives us a model of a financial crisis. And he starts out his business cycle with an expansion of a non-monetary sector or industry, meaning it's not money that causes the sector to expand or grow. So that's a short run, but in the long run, Minsky does increase the supply of money and credit, and the necessary condition is met. Now, this is a limiting notion. I think is a pretty solid proof of why the business cycle is a monetary phenomenon. But there's a way for the non-monetary people to hold their ground as well, and I'll go over that. But first, let me provide the proof to you of the necessary condition. We're going to draw two graphs, and I don't have it in a handout or a write-up, so what I want you to do is draw the market equilibrium graph for apples that we've been using as the second of 3 graphs in our quantity theory of money graphs. You have a supply curve and a demand curve for apples, and they have an equilibrium price. And we're going to assume that the supply of money and credit is held constant. So in a boom, the demand for apples keeps shifting outward, if you will, and for other goods as well. The respective demand curves there shift outward. And the question is, can it continue to shift outward through time and space in the northeast direction, of course, with price increasing as with every shift? Is it possible, given that money income is constant, it hasn't changed, can we perpetually, continuously shift the demand curve out? And the answer is obviously no, but why no? Well, suppose you consume all of your income and the demand curve is shifting out because of you're spending all of your income. Or you have a credit line and you use that all up. You borrow, and then you borrow from girlfriends, boyfriends, your favorite aunt and uncle, other friends, and right up to your limit, and you spend it all on apples and other things. And so the demand curve continues to shift out. If you have savings, you spend down your savings to zero, and again, the demand curve continues to shift out. If you have investments, you liquidate them, you sell them, and then you take the proceeds of the investments and spend on apples and other goods and services, and the demand curve continues to shift out. And so the question is, again, can you continue to shift that demand curve out as the boom of the business cycle would require? Remember, the necessary condition is an increasing supply of money and credit is a necessary condition for the recurrence or occurrence of the long-run boom of the business cycle. Short run, we don't have to worry about the short run. The longer run, though, we do, because the shifting out of demand, increasing demand, will not continue without limit when the money income is the same and we're holding the money supply constant, actually. So, so when you use up all of your source of funding, then what are you going to do? Well, you're not going to buy more goods and services. The source of funding is not there. So the demand curve does stop at some point, and but long before that point, people are going to complain about the height of individual prices and maybe stop buying the goods, maybe stop shifting that demand curve in the northeast direction. So part of the proof is to look at the shifting demand curve out and to the right in the northeast direction, so that we have higher prices, yes, but this conforms to what a boom is, and you have the increasing demand for output, and does it continue on with an outer limit? The answer is no, and that should be obvious. It's in the limit that we see the fact that the non-monetary explanation cannot explain the continuance of the boom anymore because individuals have run out of funding. And then we have one more graph to look at, the quantity of loanable funds graph, with the nominal rate of interest on the vertical axis and quantity of loanable funds supplied and demanded on the horizontal axis. Again, as part of the proof, this is the second half of it, we're going to assume the money supply is constant. money supply and credit. And so instead of having a positively sloped money supply curve, we have a vertically sloped money supply curve. And of course, when we're talking about investment, you talk about the demand for investment. And so in a boom, the demand for investment is continuously shifting out. The demand for loanable funds is increasing. And so what we do, we cause the demand curve to shift, but it's intersecting on the vertical supply curve. And this gives us what? Higher and higher rates of nominal interest. And so as you know, there's an expected return on equity or a return on enterprise value for a firm. And at some point, that return on enterprise value or equity is going to be greater. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. Let's try it again. The nominal rate of interest is going to be greater than what the return on equity is, or the return on enterprise value. I got it mixed up there a little bit. In other words, with the shifting demand curve, nominal interest is increasing, but we haven't done anything to increase the return on equity or return on enterprise value. So the boom is cut off at its knees. People would complain, hey, the rates of interest are too high, and therefore the business cycle doesn't continue without limit in the economy. But if you increase the supply of money and credit, then we meet the necessary condition, and the demand continues to shift out for goods and services. And then the demand for investment spending for loanable funds is shifting as well. And the supply curve is not vertical anymore, it's horizontal. Horizontal, goodness. Positively sloped is what I want to say. So you have this all-important necessary condition given to us by Gottfried Haller. And he says the supply of money and credit is a necessary condition for the occurrence of a long-run boom, or the recurrence of the boom through time. It doesn't stop. It's a necessary condition. Now, there's this, anytime when science talks about a necessary condition, there is usually a sufficiency condition as well. And this one is not so difficult to prove, this sufficiency condition. If you and I are the central bank, and we decide to increase the money supply and meet the necessary condition by creating $1, you and I know that that will not give us the boom of the business cycle. There has to be a sufficient rate of growth in the supply of money and credit to give us the boom of the business cycle, long-run boom of the business cycle. And so the sufficiency condition is easier to derive than the necessary condition, and it's easily understandable. In actual practice, it seems to be the more important of the two. It's easy to meet the necessary condition, but sometimes the sufficiency condition is not met. Now, in the Great Recession of 2007, 2009, the necessary condition was not met. And of course, if the necessary condition is not met, then the sufficiency condition is not met either. And so we had a financial crisis. But at some point, we'll talk more about that. I was one of the very few economists in the New York area, really in the whole world, to have predicted the Great Recession. I did so in July of 2007. It was quite a story there, but another time. So everybody, what have we talked about tonight? We've talked about we just talked about the necessary and sufficiency conditions for the recurrence of the business cycle, the long run, for really to be more precise, um, for the appearance of a long run boom in the business cycle, the recurrence of it. You have to have an increasing supply of money and credit. In other words, the demand for goods and services shift outward without limit if the necessary conditions being met. And then then you have the sufficiency condition. Now, economists who favor non-monetary explanations of the business cycle say, well, look, we grant you that there is a sufficiency and necessary condition about money and credit that we have to consider, and nobody's going to contest it. So you're right. An increasing supply of money and credit is necessary for the occurrence of the long run boom, and then there's a sufficiency condition. But there are other variables, non-monetary variables, that are more important than the necessary and sufficiency condition amount of money and credit. So the non-monetary people, the Keynesian economists, can say that very easily. So we realize that our proof of the necessary condition and sufficiency condition is not a proof that the business cycle is a monetary phenomenon. We think it is, but we have to allow for the fact that the other side has arguments. Well, they recognize the necessary and sufficiency condition, and they say other variables are more important. So we've talked about the demand for money. What are the three big independent variables that cause the demand for money to change? Population change, increasing specialization, that is the division of labor is growing in size and affiliating into more and more corners, as it were. And with more specialization, you have an increased demand for money. The number three here is the extension of the market system over the surface of the earth. And from roughly 1969 to the present day, the whole world has opted more towards the market system, more towards capitalism than ever before. And this is a third factor. Now, it's curious to say that population growth, increased specialization, and the extension of the market order, they seemingly all occur at one time to give quite a growth spurt to the economy. The concern about transactional demand for money, precautionary and speculative demands for money, though interesting to read about, looking at motives for the demand for money is not very enlightening. Eventually, no matter what demand you talk about given to us by looking at the motive of individuals, eventually the money will be spent. So let's talk about the common denominator of values. The common denominator of values meets the intellectual needs of mankind, of the entrepreneurs, and then you have the economic historians, the CPAs, the accountants, the bookkeepers, and they tell a story to whether or not your firm has been successful for usually a given short-term period of time. They are hired to put together a story, and they make use of those 8 key concepts. But then we drop the concern of the accountant for recent past and look to the future, and we know that there is the uncertainty of the future there, Uncertainty arises from what? Arises from imperfect information, but more importantly, incomplete information. And if you are an entrepreneur, if you've ever started a business, my goodness, every day the entrepreneur faces the uncertainty of the future. He wish he had more information. His information was more complete. And he tries not to be misguided by imperfect information, if you will. But the uncertainty of the future is a fact of life to the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur really is the fourth factor of production. You have land, labor, and capital. And those were given to us by the classical school. But also we have the entrepreneurial task of putting together a business unit and continuing it, expanding it. So I think I've said everything I want to. So I'm going to end this lecture, and this will be lecture 14. And it's not very long, of course, but I did receive an email that asked what chapters are the students to be held responsible for the midterm exam, and just one, the chapter 16, I think it is, the demand for money. If not 16 in the later editions, just look for the demand for money chapter in your text. Thank you very much, and I will end the lecture right now. I hope you have a good evening, and I'm going to start working on a study guide for you. It may be available later tonight. Certainly lecture 14 will be, and what do I want to say here? If not tonight, for the study guide early tomorrow morning. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you tomorrow night.